Surprises in my garden, things I didn't plant, things I didn't expect. The first one right behind me, this wild grapevine that's growing along this fence. I did not plant it, I let it grow, and this is about its third year and it's filled in this entire area. This is the other side of that wild grapevine and it is extending out past the fence. It's becoming a very tangled, wild mess of foliage, but that's exactly how I like it. It did produce clusters of grapes here, but they pretty much all got eaten by the birds, and I think they acted as a pretty good trap crop to distract the birds from other varieties of grapes that I did intentionally plant that are more palatable, like these Concord grapes right here. And if I pull back some of this foliage, we'll take a look and see that I have some grapes that are producing on this already in its second year. Next thing that surprised me are these radish flowers. I ate plenty of these radishes, but then I let a lot of them go to seed, and what I got were a ton of flowers and a bunch of these little seed pods that when they're green, they're actually edible. And if you snap them open, you can see they're pretty watery inside. They have little underdeveloped seeds there and they taste pretty good. If you're not a fan of really spicy radishes, these have a much more mild flavor. Blue Adirondack potato flowers, that's the next surprise that I was not expecting in the garden. I know potato plants produce flowers, but I did not know the blue Adirondack potato produces these amazing purplish flowers right here. And I did not expect how much the bumblebees would love these potato flowers from the blue Adirondack potato. They cannot get enough of them, as you can see here. This extremely tall elderberry tree in just its second year of growth, starting its second year, just a little over 1 year old. That was a huge surprise in the garden. I did not think it would get this tall, starting from a seedling that was probably only about this tall, or maybe even a little smaller, like this one right here. That's kind of how it started out. I noticed on these elderberry trees, they put out the first year growth here that then in the second year looks kind of woody like this, and it gets pretty tall, but then the second year growth that it just starts to put out in its second year, that's this green shoot right here, that, if we follow it up, is taller than anything else. And it's producing flowers at the top that are then gonna turn into actual elderberries that I can, process and use. A ton of little clusters of these flowers all over the plant that are gonna turn into elderberries. These pumpkin plants are the next surprise, and while I did bury a pumpkin in this location, I didn't think I'd get just this many plants coming up. I also have another one coming up right here from one seed that just fell in my garden, and this one is already huge and it's sprawling out across my lawn. This is where I buried an old rotten pumpkin in the ground there, and you can see all of these different pumpkin vines that are coming off, and they're producing a ton of these amazing looking flowers that are gonna get pollinated, and hopefully I'll have a bunch of pumpkins this year. Another surprise I found in my back garden where I have all of these trellises here, I'm growing tomato plants up these trellises, but behind that tomato plant is actually a potato plant, even though they look so similar because they're in the same family of nightshades. And last year I grew potatoes in this bed and I thought I harvested all of them, but I apparently left a few behind because here's a tomato, that's a potato, that's a potato. They do look extremely similar. Look at the leaves right there on the tomato, the leaves right here on the potato, a little bit different, but pretty similar. And the potatoes do produce those little berries and then flowers that I showed you earlier. I think I'm gonna get a few potatoes out of these plants that have continued to survive from potatoes that I left here after harvesting last year. This is another thing that surprised me, just how soon I'm getting some green tomatoes that I think are gonna be ripe in the month of June. I'm here in Ohio and it's just the very beginning of June and I already have some tomato production, which is very exciting because I love homegrown tomatoes. Here's another area of the garden where I planted mostly cherry tomatoes, and this area gets quite a lot more sun, and I am getting some cherry tomatoes that are starting to produce here on these plants. There's a few more over here, flowers and cherry tomatoes. Look at that huge cluster of cherry tomatoes right there. That is extremely exciting. And another surprise on this same area is all of these raspberries that are producing in the second year of having this raspberry plant. Raspberries typically will give you fruit production the second year. The first year cane is here, the brown one, and the second year growth coming off here will produce raspberries. And I'm already getting some really decent production out of this raspberry for, this early in its life cycle. And I also have a thornless blackberry planted right here, and I'm getting some flowering and fruiting and production from that as well, which is really cool to see. Behind me is one of the biggest surprises in the garden. While I shouldn't have been surprised, these are growing so tall. These sunflowers behind me are ready. I just planted a couple last year, and now I've got a bunch back here behind me. I did not intentionally plant any of these sunflowers right here, and I didn't thin them out, and they're coming up in these big clusters, little groups of them together. Obviously, ideally they should be spaced out more, but I'm just gonna let them come up and see how they grow. A few more in the back that are growing pretty tall, and then a few monsters over here already that are well over my head and above my fingertips as far as I can reach up here. And just recently I noticed that not only do I have these sunflowers in this bed right here, but over in my lawn there were a bunch of seedlings coming up, and they are definitely little sunflower seedlings here. And so I decided to put some mulch around them, and I'm gonna see if those will come up as well. I think it would be cool if, as you exit this space in the backyard to the right, you have a bunch of sunflowers coming up in this area, and then you pass through here, and on the left, you have a ton more sunflowers. Thanks for watching and being surprised with me here in the garden today.